You know that feeling when you're going about your day, perfectly fine, and then your son or daughter sits down across from you with that look on their face. You know the look. And they say the words you've been dreading. Mom, Dad, we need to have a serious conversation. Maybe they've been leaving articles about assisted living on the kitchen counter. Maybe they keep bringing up that one time you forgot where you put your keys 6 months ago. Maybe every phone call ends with, "Are you sure you're okay? We just worry so much." And here's what I've seen happen over and over again in my 40 years as a clinical psychologist. Perfectly healthy, sharp, capable adults. People like you, who started to believe the story their children were telling about them. Not because it was true, but because it was repeated so often and with such apparent love and concern that they stopped trusting their own reality. And some of them ended up in nursing homes they didn't need. Not because their bodies failed them, not because their minds gave out, but because they were convinced, psychologically, emotionally, gradually, that they couldn't manage on their own anymore. Today I'm going to show you exactly how that happens. I want to be absolutely clear. This video is not about attacking your children or assuming they have bad intentions. Most of the time they genuinely believe they're helping. But good intentions and good judgment are not the same thing. And you deserve to know the difference. I'm going to walk you through 6 specific psychological patterns, 6 tricks, though most are unconscious, that adult children commonly use to nudge aging parents toward institutional care. And I'm going to give you the tools to recognize each one, name it, and stand your ground. Stay with me. This may be the most important thing you watch this year. Before we get into the list, let me say something important. There are absolutely real situations where a nursing home or assisted living facility is the right, even life-saving, decision. Severe dementia. A major medical event. A condition that requires round-the-clock professional care. I am not dismissing those situations. They are real. They matter. But those situations are not the majority. Study after study shows that the threshold for needing institutional care is applied far too early and far too often to people who are cognitively sharp, physically capable, and perfectly able to live in their own homes with modest support. The question you have to ask yourself is not, could I theoretically benefit from more help? The question is, am I being pushed toward a decision that serves my needs or one that serves someone else's comfort? Here are the 6 patterns that can blur that line. The first trick is the one I see most often, and it's the most insidious because it starts with something real. You forget a name. You knock over a glass. You get a date wrong on the calendar. These are things that happen to every human being at every age. I've forgotten where I put my phone more times than I can count, and I assure you, my memory is just fine. But here's what starts to happen in certain family dynamics. Every small mistake gets cataloged. Every slip gets remembered. Every moment of normal human imperfection gets filed away as evidence of your decline. And over time, sometimes over months, these small incidents get compiled into a narrative. Remember when you left the stove on? Which happened once, 3 years ago. Remember when you got confused at the pharmacy? Which happened during a stressful day with a new medication. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. Once your children have arrived at the conclusion that you are declining, their brains will unconsciously filter every piece of information to support that conclusion. The 10 times you drove perfectly? Not remembered. The one time you made a turn a little wide? Remembered forever. The moment you need to watch for is when you hear phrases like, "This keeps happening, Mom," about something that has happened once. Or, "You're just not yourself lately," without any specific evidence, or the collection of incidents, presented like a legal case, that individually mean nothing but collectively are meant to overwhelm you. Here's what you need to hear from me, as a psychologist who has worked with hundreds of older adults. Normal aging is not decline. Occasional forgetfulness is not dementia. Moving a little more slowly is not disability. And one bad week does not define your capacity for independence. If you are genuinely concerned about your cognitive health, Do this. Get a proper neuropsychological evaluation from a doctor you choose, not one your children select. A baseline assessment done proactively, on your terms, gives you documented evidence of where you actually stand, evidence that cannot be rewritten by a family narrative. One forgotten key does not define you. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The second pattern is more subtle, and in some ways, more damaging. It doesn't come as one big confrontation. It comes as a slow, steady drip of small expressions of worry, delivered over weeks, months, sometimes years. Are you sure you're okay, Dad? You look a little tired. Are you sleeping enough? I'm not sure that neighborhood is as safe as it used to be. Are you really comfortable driving that far? You don't have to do everything yourself, you know. Each comment, on its own, sounds like love. Sounds like care. But when these questions come constantly, relentlessly, the psychological effect is something very different from love. What happens is this: you start to internalize their anxiety as your own. You begin to second-guess decisions you were making confidently. You start asking yourself, am I really okay? Should I be worried? Maybe they're seeing something I'm not. In clinical psychology, we call a version of this gaslighting, not in the dramatic, intentional sense, but in the functional sense. Your sense of your own reality is gradually replaced by someone else's version of it. And here's the cruel irony. The more anxious you become about your own capabilities, the more evidence there is of that anxiety. Stress impairs memory. Worry disrupts sleep. Self-doubt affects physical coordination. The concern itself creates the decline it claims to be responding to. The antidote to this is what I call a reality check, and it must come from outside your family system. Find a doctor you trust, a therapist, a close friend of many years, someone with no stake in this family narrative, and ask them directly, "Do you notice anything that concerns you about my functioning?" Their answer, not your children's repeated expressions of worry, is the truth you need to be living by. Your confidence belongs to you. Don't outsource it to someone else's anxiety. Now we come to the pattern that I find the most emotionally sophisticated and the most manipulative, even when it comes from a place of genuine love. It works like this. Your desire to live independently, in your own home, on your own terms, gets reframed not as a reasonable human need, but as a burden you are placing on your family. Listen for these phrases. I just can't sleep at night worrying about you. The whole family is under so much stress because of this situation. We're not asking you to do this for us. We're asking you to think about what this is doing to all of us. What has happened here is a profound reversal of responsibility. Your legitimate need for autonomy has been transformed into an act of selfishness. And if you're a loving parent, which you almost certainly are, that framing hits you right in the deepest part of who you are, because you spent your whole life putting your children first. And now the suggestion that insisting on your independence is hurting them? That's an almost impossible weight to carry. But I need to say this to you very directly, as a psychologist and as someone who has seen this pattern cause real harm. Your desire to live independently is not selfish. It is human. It is healthy. It is your right. The discomfort your children feel about your living situation is theirs to manage. It is not your job to give up your home, your routines, and your sense of self in order to ease their emotional discomfort. Now, let me be fair here. Sometimes what looks like guilt tripping is genuine exhaustion. Adult children who are working full-time, raising their own kids, and trying to support an aging parent are under real pressure. That pressure is real, and it deserves compassion. But the answer to that pressure is not for you to surrender your independence. The answer is a family conversation about realistic support structures, in-home help, transportation services, community resources that let you stay where you want to be while genuinely lightening the load on your children. Guilt is not a medical diagnosis. It is not a reason to move to a nursing home. The fourth pattern is particularly effective because it uses something you trust, medicine, as a tool to override your judgment. You trust doctors. You should trust doctors. and your children know that you trust doctors. So what sometimes happens is this. Medical appointments that should be about your health become opportunities to build a case for placement. And it happens in subtle ways you might not notice in the moment. Your child comes with you to your doctor's appointment and does most of the talking. They frame your symptoms in the most alarming possible light. They ask leading questions. Doctor, given everything we've described, is it really safe for her to be living alone? Or perhaps you come home from an appointment and your child tells you, the doctor said you really should consider transitioning to a care facility. But when you try to remember, that's not quite what the doctor said. It was more nuanced than that. But somehow, in the retelling, the nuance has disappeared. Or your child has found a doctor, a new one you don't know, who specializes in geriatric care and has recommended an evaluation. Who chose this doctor? Who provided the background information? What story were they told before you walked in? I am not suggesting that all doctors are infallible or that all medical recommendations are wrong. But I am telling you that medical opinions are only as good as the information they're based on, and you have the right to control that information. Here is what you must know. Under federal law, you have the absolute right to see your doctor alone. You have the right to speak privately without your child in the room. You have the right to ask for a second opinion. You have the right to ask your doctor, directly and specifically. In your professional judgment, based only on your clinical assessment of me, do you believe I need a higher level of care? And here is my practical recommendation. Bring someone to your medical appointments who is not a family member, a trusted friend, a neighbor, someone from your church or community. Someone who has no agenda, who will simply be there as a witness to what is actually said. Your medical record is yours. Your health story is yours. Don't let it be written by someone else. The fifth pattern is the one that, in my clinical experience, causes the most long-term damage, because it actually creates the conditions it claims to be reacting to. It happens slowly. So slowly that you may not notice it until the isolation is already well established. It might start with your child saying, "I'll drive you to church this Sunday. You don't have to bother with the car." That's thoughtful. That's kind. And maybe the next week and the week after. Then maybe they start making calls on your behalf. I talked to your friend Margaret and told her you weren't feeling up to the book club this month. You hadn't said that, but it was already done. Then your activities start to consolidate around what your child can manage and arrange. The volunteer work gets dropped. The Tuesday card game gets skipped. The neighbor you used to have coffee with stops getting invited because we don't want you to overdo it. And then, 6 months later, a year later, your child presents the case. Look at how isolated you've become. You barely see anyone. You need a community. You need to be somewhere with people. The isolation that is being used as evidence of your need for placement is the same isolation that was carefully, gradually constructed over the preceding months. I want to give you a hard fact from the research. Social isolation is one of the single strongest predictors of cognitive decline in older adults. It also predicts depression, physical health deterioration, and mortality. When you lose your social connections, you genuinely do start to decline. But here's what often gets reversed in these family narratives. The isolation comes before the decline. The isolation causes the decline, not the other way around. Your social connections, your friendships, your community, your activities, your sense of purpose are not luxuries. They are medicine. They are some of the most powerful protective factors against exactly the kind of decline your children are worried about. Protect them like you protect your physical health. Say no when your social calendar is being managed by someone else. Get yourself to that book club. Keep that coffee date. Call the friend yourself. Your community is your lifeline. Don't let anyone cut it, even with the best of intentions. The sixth pattern is the one that often moves the fastest and the one with the most concrete, lasting consequences. It begins typically with a genuine concern. Dad, are you keeping up with the bills? Do you need some help with the finances? And maybe you say yes, because maybe you do want a little help. Or maybe you say no, and it happens anyway, a little bit at a time. Your child starts reviewing your bank statements just to make sure everything is in order. Their name gets added to your checking account just in case of an emergency. They start paying a few bills online on your behalf because it's easier for them to manage. They bring up the idea of a power of attorney, while we're all healthy and clear-headed, so we're prepared. Each step sounds reasonable. Each step is presented as protection. But each step moves decision-making authority further away from you. And here is the clinical reality I have observed in practice. Once financial control transfers to your adult children, your residential independence becomes dramatically more vulnerable. Because the person who controls your money is the person who ultimately controls your choices. There are several red flags I want you to memorize right now. If your child is suggesting you consolidate your assets or change your accounts without a clear explanation of why it's medically or legally necessary, stop. If someone is pushing for power of attorney before there is any documented cognitive impairment, stop. If you are being discouraged from speaking to your own financial advisor or attorney directly, stop. Here is what I want you to do. Consult an elder law attorney. Not one your children recommend. One you find yourself, or through your local bar association, or through a senior advocacy organization. This is a field of law specifically designed to protect your rights and your assets as an older adult. A competent elder law attorney can help you set up legal structures that protect your autonomy, ensure your wishes are honored, and make certain that no one, regardless of their intentions, can make decisions about your life without your genuine, informed consent. Your financial independence is the foundation of every other form of independence. Guard it carefully. Now, I want to take a step back, because I believe in telling you the full truth, even when it's complicated. In my 40 years of practice, I have seen these patterns emerge from 3 different places, and they are not all the same. The first is genuine love and fear, poorly expressed. Your children remember you as the strongest person in their world. Watching you age is terrifying for them. They don't have the tools to process that fear, so it comes out as control. They push toward institutional care not because they want to be rid of you, but because they cannot tolerate the anxiety of knowing you're alone in a house 300 miles away and they can't protect you. That is love. Clumsy, overwhelming, sometimes suffocating love. The second is pragmatic exhaustion. Caring for an aging parent, even from a distance, is genuinely hard. It requires time, energy, and emotional resources that many adult children are running very short on. The desire to have you in a facility is sometimes less about what's best for you and more about what's sustainable for them. That's a human response, but it should not be confused with medical necessity. And the third, and I say this carefully because it is uncomfortable, but it is real, is sometimes financial interest. Inheritance, property, assets that have been anticipated for a long time. I have sat with older adults whose children's concern about their welfare accelerated dramatically after a will was updated or a property was appraised. I am not saying your children are greedy. I am saying that in some families, some of the time, this is a factor. And you deserve to know that it exists. Understanding why something is happening doesn't mean you have to accept it. Knowing the source of the pressure helps you respond to it with clarity instead of guilt. Now let's talk about what you can actually do. Because knowledge without action is just anxiety. And I don't want to leave you anxious. I want to leave you prepared. Step 1. Get a proactive baseline assessment. Don't wait for your children to schedule an evaluation. Get there first. Ask your doctor for a full cognitive assessment and physical function evaluation on your own, on your terms, while you are feeling well. Having documented evidence of your current functional status gives you something concrete to stand on when someone claims you are declining. It is much harder to argue with a medical record than with a family story. Step 2. Document your own competence. Start keeping a simple log, not obsessively, but consistently. Note your activities, what you did today, who you spoke with, what you managed, what decisions you made. Pay your bills and keep the records. Write down your plans and follow through on them. This is not paranoia. This is evidence. If it ever becomes necessary to demonstrate that you are managing your life competently, you will have the documentation to prove it. Step 3. Build and protect your independent support circle. Make sure that at any given time, there are at least 2 or 3 people in your life, outside your immediate family, who know you well, see you regularly, and can speak honestly to your functioning. A doctor you see independently. A friend of many years. A neighbor. A pastor. Someone from a community organization. These people are not just your social network. They are your witnesses. They are the ones who can say, from direct observation, what your daily life actually looks like. Step 4. Know your legal rights. You have rights that many older adults don't know about or don't know how to use. You have the right to make your own medical decisions as long as you are competent, which is defined legally, not by your family's opinion. You have the right to decline any living arrangement that is not your choice. You have the right to an independent legal advocate. Learn these rights. Write them down. Share them with the people in your independent support circle. Step 5. Have the honest conversation first. This is the one that takes the most courage, but it is also the most powerful. Don't wait for your children to come to you with a plan. Come to them with yours. Sit them down and say, I want to talk about my future because I think it's important that we're all on the same page. Here is what I need to feel safe and supported. Here is what I am not willing to give up. Here is what I would need to happen before I would ever consider a major change in living situation. And I am telling you this now clearly so that we never have to have a crisis conversation about it. Taking the lead in that conversation changes the entire dynamic. You are no longer the subject of the conversation. You are the author of it. I want to leave you with something I tell my patients who come to me in the middle of exactly this kind of family pressure. I tell them, what you are fighting for is not just your house. It is not just your routine. You are fighting for the right to be the author of your own life. And that is a fight worth having. Wanting to live in your own home, wake up in your own bed, cook your own breakfast, see your own friends, and make your own decisions. That is not stubbornness. That is not denial. That is not placing your needs above your family's. That is what it means to be alive. In 40 years of clinical practice, the most consistent finding I have seen is this. The people who age best, the ones who remain sharp, healthy, connected, and joyful well into their 80s and beyond, are not the ones who surrendered their independence earliest. They are the ones who defended it most fiercely. They are the ones who said, I know who I am, I know what I need, and I will be heard. You can be that person. You already are that person. Comment independent below if you are committed to living life on your own terms. And if someone in your life, a friend, a sibling, anyone who needs to hear this, please share this video with them today. Subscribe to Strong Elderly Life for more content designed for people who refuse to let age define their limits. Next week, we're going to walk through the exact words you can say when your kids tell you it's time, a complete script for having that conversation with clarity, love, and strength. I'll see you then.